My name's James Thomas, editor of the Occitane anthology Grains of Gold, recently published for Francis Bootle Publishers. And I'm here to talk a little bit about that and my history of contact with Occitane. So I guess everything starts with when I was 17, I went interrailing with my brother to the south of France, and we travelled through Languedoc, Provence, and then up to the Alps. It was later, about 10 years later, that I came across Occitane as a living language whilst I was working in a campsite near Béziers. This would have been about 1996. And I got to know a few people vaguely on the campsite who told me that Occitane was still a real thing and that people spoke it. And I was curious and I started asking questions about it. And a year or so later, I found myself living in Barcelona. Over time, once I decided to stay in Barcelona, I saw this as an opportunity to, first of all, learn Catalan, having already learnt a little bit of Spanish. And through Catalan, it was that I rediscovered the Occitane reality, mainly due to the fact that Occitane is obviously spoken in the Val d'Aran, and the Catalan regional government has to acknowledge that, and gradually started to learn the language and visit places on the other side of the Pyrenees and try and hear the language spoken. And I did actually hear it spoken in the town of Foix, or Foix, in the Ariège region. So that sparked again my interest in the language, and I wanted to do something to help it, and I just out of personal curiosity wanted to learn it as well. But it wasn't until I returned to England in 2002 that I had an opportunity to really study properly, because I was accepted to do a research master's in the French department of Bristol University. There was a scholar there who was an Occitane specialist, and she agreed that I could study the later period of the language. Although she was a medievalist, she agreed for me to look at 19th century literature, which is what I was really interested in. But through that, I had the idea of maybe finding a publisher to do an anthology of Occitane literature, because there's a gap in the Anglophone world for a kind of all-encompassing, all-embracing, comprehensive study of 1,000 years of this language and this culture. So I had just this vague idea at the time of producing something that went from the beginning to the present day, and that's when I was fortunate to meet Clive Boutle. And I went through this list, and a lot of the publishers said it's very interesting, but we haven't got the funds for that. And in fact, Clive's name wasn't on the list, but one of the names that was suggested that I contact Clive. And this would be about 2010. I went to his house in London, and we got on very well, and we agreed almost unanimously on the idea, the philosophy behind the book and the anthology, and we took it from there really. And then the process of starting the research for the book could take place. So it was a real pleasure to discover that my own culture, the British culture, over at least the last 2 centuries, and in some cases before that, has shown an interest in Occitane. Personally, I will be hoping to focus on translating Occitane prose and poetry in the future, and that this anthology can lead to a greater awareness of Occitane literature and language throughout the world, and amongst the Occitanes themselves. So one of the things I've discovered here in Ostana is that people who are very passionate about their own culture have been extremely kind and grateful and positive about the anthology, because it brings together a whole group of their own texts which perhaps would otherwise have been difficult to find in one place. So I'm hopeful that as it's a bilingual anthology, it will be useful to students and enthusiasts of Occitan here in France and Italy and Spain, as well as in English-speaking countries.